Hey guys, welcome back to another review where I talk about the 2002 television series Firefly. I am the Comics Kid 2099, and if you were here a week ago, I revealed my intention to go through every episode of Firefly and review each episode one at a time. And then I will be going over the movie, and then after that, I will be talking about the graphic novel called Serenity, A Shepherd's Tale. For now, I will be talking about the second episode of the series titled The Train Job. I briefly mentioned this last week, but this episode actually acted as the pilot for this series. The short version of the story is that the network did not like one scene in the pilot, so they opted not to show it, and they asked the creative crew of this series to make the first regular-length episode act as an introduction to the series. I can only imagine how infuriating this would be if I was working on a television show like this. For one, this episode has to do everything the first episode did in half the time. Well, it doesn't do everything. We don't have any mention of the Reavers, but it does do a heck of a lot. It gives us a clear idea of Mal and his antipathy toward the Alliance. We even get a better idea of what the political climate of this galaxy was before the war. We get a quick reference to Simon risking all to save his sister from the more sinister side of the Alliance, and we get a quick recap of what Inara's job is like and what all it entails. Remarkably, this episode does a really great job handling all of the elements that a body might not have seen if they were watching this show on television and they missed the pilot episode. And this episode is even able to tell a story in addition to having to catch up everyone who did not see the pilot episode. The story here is as follows. Mal takes on a job from a Russian gangster named Niska. Niska wants Mal and the crew to take some cargo from the Alliance off of a moving train and give it to Niska's men in exchange for a healthy sum of money. Mal and his folks are more or less impoverished and could use the money, and taking from the Alliance, who most of them see as unjust, is just icing on the cake. Before the job begins, while we are being reintroduced to River and Simon's situation, Mal briefly comes in contact with both of them, and River mentions that Mal means bad in Latin. Quick confession. The first several times that I watched this episode, I always thought that that was a useless line that didn't really have any bearing on what was going on in this episode. Boy, was I stupid. The entire episode is basically an examination of Mal's morals. Mal's morals. What line is he willing to cross, and what is he simply going to say no to? I mentioned that Mal wasn't exactly a great person in my review of the pilot episode, Serenity. He steals, he puts civilians in danger with little or no regard to how his career will affect them, and the only reason we root for him is because everyone else that the crew comes in contact with is about 1,000 times worse than Mal. But this episode shows us that Mal is willing to make his life a little bit harder in exchange for doing the right thing. It's been some time since I listened to the commentaries on the episodes of this series, but I do believe I recall Joss Whedon, one of the co-creators of the series, saying that one of the requests/demands that the network made for this show was to make Mal a little bit less of a grumpy curmudgeon. And I can definitely see that at work here. We had entire minutes of the pilot episode where Mal was brooding harder than an entire squad of the X-Men's brood. But here we see that Mal is much more, I don't want to say happy, but he's definitely lost a lot of that brood factor that he had in the previous episode. At least twice he mentions how stealing their cargo will be much more fun with an entire train full of Alliance soldiers on board. The Mal of the previous episode would have been much less happy to be in the presence of feds from the Alliance, I think. And this is not a bad thing in my humble opinion. This is just a modification to an existing character, not a complete retooling of said character. He still acts the same, at least in my opinion. He's just been slightly changed to make him a little bit more fun to watch. Anyhow, the job goes somewhat sour, leaving the cargo on the ship, while Mal and his second-in-command Zoe are stranded on the train. I mentioned in my review of the pilot that Zoe is my least favorite character in the series because she really never quite gets to the point where she has her own opinion or thoughts. Aside from two moments in the entire series and movie that I can think of, Zoe was always there to echo Mal's opinions, it seemed to me. I still more or less hold to that opinion, but I'm now seeing that Zoe does act just a little bit different than Mal. It was perhaps a tad unjust of me to say that Zoe was just Mal 2.0. She does seem to think that the Alliance being on the train is a bad omen for them, whereas Mal shrugs it off. And then when you combine this with her telling Mal that dealing with patience is a bad idea in the previous episode, I reckon I was a little off the mark about saying that Zoe didn't have much of a purpose in this series. I still don't think she is nearly utilized as much as she could have or should have been, but I am saying that I was maybe not quite correct in my assessment that I made in the previous review. When Mal and Zoe are questioned by the local constable about the stolen goods, they and we find out that they helped steal medicine that was going to help treat what is essentially the black lung. This is where River saying that Mal is Latin for bad comes in. Mal has essentially gotten him and his crew a solid amount of money from this job, and when Zoe and Mal have the chance to turn tail and run and get their payment, they instead opt to take the stolen goods back to the town, where they could easily be caught and punished for their crimes, which they know the lawman is none too happy about. And this will also make Niska and his men very upset because of how important Niska stressed finishing this job was to him. Even when they offer Niska's right-hand man the money that Niska paid them up front, this man still talks about how they are dead men walking as far as Niska is concerned. This is where Mal is made just a little bit more of a better person as far as I'm concerned. This isn't quite done in a cheap way either, if you ask me. I'm not saying the pilot episode was bad, but I do think that the way we are meant to care about Mal and his problems is a little bit underhanded in how it was done. If Mal was lined up against some people who are actually good, decent folks in the pilot episode, I'm certain that the audience would not care about him as much as they do. But this episode actually has Mal go through a change of heart that proves risky for him and his people, but he does it anyway. And this is the mark of a more or less good person, in my opinion. I really like it. I also like that we get some lead up to this. If you're watching this for the first time, you might think that Book mostly exists in this episode to provide exposition about why Simon and River are on the ship. Book seems to think that there's more to Mal's decision other than it being the right thing to do. And who knows, maybe there is more to it. I do like the way Mal tries to pass off his good deeds as less than that. Mal proves that he is a good person in this episode, but he wants everyone else to think that he is just scum. This is an absolute goldmine as far as characterization goes, and I look forward to seeing more of this kind of behavior from Mal. He wants people to think that he's less of a good person than what he is, and that's very interesting to me. Speaking of Book, this episode also gives us the first hints that he might be more than meets the eye. Well, I guess I could say that when Book is able to quickly and easily disarm the Fed in the pilot, that was a hint that he wasn't just a preacher. Here, he indicates that he's heard of the gangster Niska, and Jane even asks how he's heard that name before if he's just a preacher. We're never told, which only fuels our curiosity. Yeah, I'm sure a little bit of Book's behavior in his past is explained in The Shepherd's Tale, but I haven't read it, so as of now, it's a mystery to me. This, along with the little stinger at the end of the episode, is a really great way of seeding future plots that can be used later. Sadly, this, along with the stinger at the end of the episode, never quite did get the chance to be explored later. I mean, yeah, in the comics, but even with a show with as devout of a following as Firefly has, everyone who watched this series is not necessarily going to follow the show into the comics. So some of these subplots might as well have just gone unanswered as far as some fans are concerned. And that brings me to the end of this episode. Well, first it brings me to earlier in the episode. While the crew is discussing what their next course of action should be after taking the stolen goods aboard the ship, River mentions that they will never get away and that they, air quotes, will keep coming for what, air quotes, you stole. Of course, when you're watching this episode the first time, you might think that she's referring to the thing that was stolen as the medicine, and that the they that she's referring to is the lawmen of this local world, or even possibly some normal Alliance feds. It isn't until multiple watchings of this episode that it became clear to me that the thing that was stolen is actually River herself, and the you that River is referring to is Simon, and the they is the two men with the hands of blue, which she refers to when she says 2 by 2 hands of blue. As I said earlier, some of the subplots basically go unanswered, and the men with the hands of blue definitely fall into that category. These men, I think, show up twice in the entire series, and then they are criminally underused and taken care of in a more or less permanent fashion in the comic book set in between the television series and the movie, called Those Left Behind. While they are finally shown confronting the crew of the ship in the comic, I can't help but feel that they were kinda de-cooled so that they could be dealt with, so that we'd have an explanation to the question, why go to the operative when the Hands of Blue guys were set up in the show? These guys really did feel like they were being planned to be really awesome antagonists for our crew, and possibly dark parallels of what River could have become if Simon had not rescued her. So even though that never really went anywhere, I do like how it's being set up here. Overall, I think that's about all I have to really say about this episode. It pretty much is perfect as far as episodes go. I enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing more from this series and reviewing more in the coming weeks. I hope you guys like this video, and I hope you will come back in 1 week for my review of the next episode. And keep coming back throughout this week to see more of my videos. Until then, I'll talk to you guys later.